Welcome. Today we're diving into a fascinating era in literary history, a time when logic and order tried to, well, tame the wild spirit of art. We're talking about the neoclassical age. This was the big question that really drove the artists and writers of the 17th and 18th centuries. They were absolutely convinced they had found the answer, and it was an answer that would change literature forever. So here's our game plan. First, we'll get into the historical vibe of this new age. Then, we'll break down its core rules. After that, we'll look at the specific tools writers used. And finally, we'll trace its impact all the way to the books we read today.
Right, so the neoclassical age didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was a direct reaction to the pretty chaotic times that came right before it. Thinkers and writers were desperate for some stability, for a new way forward.
So what exactly is neoclassicism? Well, it was a movement that looked back to ancient Greece and Rome to find a clear set of rules for making art. This was the Age of Enlightenment, and the big idea was that reason could unlock everything. Not just science, but art, too.
And this is where it gets really interesting. It was a huge shift in thinking. The Renaissance was all about celebrating the individual, right? But the neoclassical writers, they were a bit more skeptical. They thought that the needs of society were way more important than any one person's desires, and that our messy human instincts had to be controlled by logic.
So how does that big idea actually turn into art? Well, it created a whole new rulebook. This wasn't about waiting for a lightning bolt of inspiration. It was about deliberate, structured, and a logical creation.
The writers from this period basically followed a formula. Reason was king, which naturally led to a huge emphasis on order and clarity. They copied the classical forms they admired so much and used satire as this incredibly sharp tool for social critique. Actually, there's a really easy way to remember these key ingredients.
Yep, just remember ROCS. It stands for reason, order, classical influence, and satire. Seriously, if you can lock in that acronym, you've got the fundamental values of the entire neoclassical movement down. These were the four pillars holding everything up.
So how did these ideas get around? Think about it. How would young, rich aristocrats get to see these ancient styles up close and personal? They weren't just reading about them.
It was the Grand Tour. This was basically a rite of passage, a big trip through Europe, especially to Italy. It exposed a whole generation of artists and writers to the real, tangible legacy of Greece and Rome, and they brought all that inspiration back home with them.
Okay, that was a lot of information. Before we dig into the nuts and bolts of how they wrote, let's just pause for a quick memory check on the key takeaways.
So, 3 key things to remember. 1. Neoclassicism was a pushback against the Renaissance, a search for order. 2. Its core values are super easy to remember with our acronym, ROCS, reason, order, classical forms, and satire. And 3. All of this was sparked by a rediscovery of ancient art and ideas.
Okay, so now that we have the rules of the game, let's look at the actual tools the writers used. How did they take a concept like rocks and put it onto the page?
This image here really nails the big shift. Literature wasn't just for telling emotional stories or for simple entertainment anymore. It became a kind of scientific instrument, a tool for rationally analyzing human nature and society with precision and logic.
And hey, remember the S in our acronym ROCS? Well, satire was the weapon of choice. It was how writers could expose all the foolishness and corruption of their time. They used wit, sarcasm, and irony to criticize society in a way that was both incredibly smart and really entertaining.
And there were 3 writers who were the undisputed heavyweights of this style. You had John Dryden, who kind of set the stage. Then came Alexander Pope, who perfected the art of satirizing high society. And of course, Jonathan Swift, who took satire to a whole new level, using it to critique, well, all of humanity.
Even their poetry was obsessed with order. They perfected something called the heroic couplet. It's simple, really, just 2 rhyming lines written in iambic pentameter. That's just a steady 10-syllable rhythm. Think of a heartbeat. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. It was balanced, it was logical, it was precise, the absolute perfect little container for the ideas of the age.
So, what did all this lead to? What's the ultimate legacy of this Age of Reason? Did all these rules create perfect art, or did they just set the stage for a rebellion?
Well, its influence really goes in 2 directions. On one hand, it totally laid the foundation for modern writing, especially the novel and the kind of structured essays we still use. But on the other hand, its obsession with reason created the very thing the next generation of artists would rebel against, sparking a brand new movement.
All right, let's do one last active recall question. If an era is completely dominated by rules, logic, and order, what kind of artistic movement do you think would naturally come next as a reaction?
Exactly. Romanticism. The Romantics came along and championed everything the neoclassicists suppressed: intense emotion, individualism, the power of nature. It was a complete rejection of all those rules we've been talking about.
But here's the crucial takeaway. Even though Romanticism was a reaction against it, the neoclassical age left a permanent mark. Every single time you read a novel with a clear, logical plot or a sharp piece of investigative journalism, you are seeing the direct legacy of this period's focus on rational, ordered prose. Which brings us to a final thought for you to consider about our own world. In an age that's so full of personal emotion and constant self-expression, is there maybe some value in looking back at an era that put such a high price on order, clarity, and the good of society as a whole? Definitely something to think about.